Welcome back, dear LHLM listener. Gyi, about 6 months ago, we made a promise that we would not talk about Michigan football in our banter section for a good while. And now it is time to come back to the maize and the blue, who are overwhelming, undermatched opponents with beautiful deftness. It'll be interesting to see what happens as the season goes on.
Go blue.
Go blue. And you are a Detroit Lions fan. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I've jumped on the back on the bandwagon with the Lions because apparently they're good. But I did have the opportunity to head down to watch the Lions play the Chiefs, and Lions won, and it was a lot of fun. And the Kansas City was a very welcoming. It was funny, Lions fans, we've had it rough, and they are coming off winning the Super Bowl, and so even they were like, you know what? Good job, you were due. And I was like, wow, how nice is it? We go, that's how bad Lions football has been. You go to the visiting stadium and they're like, you know what? You deserved it. But football's back.
I don't think that is happening to the Jets.
No.
Incidentally, speaking of the Jets, I'm not a NHL fan, but found out that my old neighbor is the head coach of the Jets. How random.
That's very random.
He was out here coaching, like assistant coaching for the Seahawks, and he was our neighbor, and now he's with the Jets. Anyway, we've got more to talk about than football, but football is going to be part of the banter section until Michigan wins the national championship.
When they do. What else we got today?
All right. So lots of acquisitions. I'm getting those annoying spam emails from private equity wanting to purchase my law firm maybe once or twice a day. They're pretty persistent and good at spamming. But there are acquisitions in the agency world that is worthy bringing up. We also have a great segment on the good, the bad, and the ugly of lawyer billboards. And finally, we're going to have a long conversation, an overdue conversation about branded advertising in general.
And with that, Lockwood, hit it.
Welcome to Lunch Hour Legal Marketing, teaching you how to promote, market, and make fat stacks for your legal practice. Here on Legal Talk Network.
Welcome to Lunch Hour Legal Marketing. It is entering fall season. It's getting a little chilly in the air, and brought to you by those amazing people from Seattle, Starbucks. Grab your pumpkin spiced latte because it is time to do the news. All right, Gyi, in our world, iLawyer Marketing was sold, and Best Lawyers also bought an agency. What's going on here?
Apparently it's time for consolidation and buying agencies. Best Lawyers, so people are familiar with Best Lawyers. They've got it's a peer review. We've talked about them before, peer-reviewed award organization. They also have a website that sells advertising. And, we've had these conversations with some of these bigger players, the internet brands companies too. My hunch is like, hey, Best Lawyers wants to get into the agency game, right? Why not? We're selling directory spots. We're selling premium listings. Let's sell some agency services, at least with the Best Lawyers acquisition. iLawyer Marketing, a little bit different story there. There seems like more of a consolidation into one of these roll-ups where private equity holding companies buying a bunch of different logos. I think they've got Apex and a couple other legal tech specific products because, hey, you deliver services and then you get them hooked up on your chat product, you get them hooked up on your, CRM, your website technology, yada, yada, right. Yada. And you can sell multiple products to a single lawyer, and why does this matter to lawyers? And we'll talk about this with some of the other news, but like the relationships between some of these companies, like they matter. They do, especially when you're starting talking about agencies, right? Because guess what? They're no longer is your agency trying to give you the best tech for you. They're giving you the best tech that their private equity company makes the most money off of, and they're making decisions in a totally different way. And anyway, it's something to think about. And lawyers should get that, right? I mean, they understand. I think especially folks that are listening to this show, they've been around the block on what happens after an acquisition. It's not always the same people in the seats making the same decisions, not the same people providing services. Anyway, that's just something to keep an eye on.
You kind of approach it from a cynical perspective, right?
Shocking.
But having said that, let me counterpoint that, and I don't disagree, but you and I have talked about the importance of the stability of the software platforms that you purchase, because if your software can't keep up, you're going to end up in a problem, right? So having financial strength behind there, very real thing. And the other thing is those roll-ups, those those kind of vertical roll-ups across the legal world, they can work on those integrations and they can make efficiencies happening, and you're not bespoke building and connecting different systems together at the same time. And one of the things that I think lawyers want is like a knowledge that this is going to work, and I'm not the first time we're trying to stitch A to B, right? And I think there's value in that.
Funny you should mention that, because our next news item is great evidence to the exact counterpoint.
Wow, we set that up beautifully. Okay. Boy, oh boy, Gyi, what happened to Filevine?
Filevine, we'll say they're going through some growing pains. The short version is that a lot of lawyers that we've talked to, a lot of the chat on social has been, oh my gosh, Filevine is a dumpster fire. Now, in fairness to Filevine, they have been growing rapidly and massively. And I'm sure that there are people that have not experienced any of these issues, but it seems like there's some technology problem with some of their earlier adopters. I don't know all the details on this, so if Filevine, you can correct us if we've got some of this wrong. But it seems like maybe one of their earlier machines or one of their early technology builds has problems. And so anyway, it's not been a good look for Filevine. I've seen a lot of people making the decision to switch. But to your point, Filevine is very well funded. Filevine Correct. Is not going anywhere. Filevine is one of the market leaders. And, in fact, when it's working, we've worked with a lot of firms that are using Filevine very effectively and successfully. But, it's kind of that false sense of like, well, they're funded, they've got money, so everything should work, and that's not always how it goes. So anyway, good luck, Filevine, and folks that are. I know there are a lot of happy customers of Filevine, so this wasn't really a Filevine bash session, just more of something to be heads up on if you're in the process of making a decision about that. Go do that research.
There is value in being on the cutting, but not bleeding edge of technology. Some people are learning that the hard way. Filevine, if you're listening. If you guys want to come on next week and give us a heads up of what happened and how you've fixed the problem, maybe we'd have you. All right. Last piece of data, news coming out. Really interesting about Gen Z women. Actually, not surprising, but it is worth highlighting. Gen Z women preferring TikTok over Google for search. So, We've been talking about changing user behavior for a long time here, and this came out. This was on one of the. It was on Search Engine Land. 51% of Gen Z women preferring TikTok over Google for search, and surprised, Gyi?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Nothing really surprises me. The way people change their habits and behaviors. But, look, Google knows this, right? We talked about this on the show before. Maybe we can put a link to the show notes. But Google recognizes that people expect they're getting a different experience from social platforms, more specifically TikTok, because you're getting much more rich video, curated, expertise-driven results than 10 blue links, right? And so it's not a surprise that that's resonating with people. And this is a trend that I think we're going to continue to see. This is why in my opinion, this is why you see Google trying to add perspectives, this perspectives filter to their results. Rich media, it's a totally different experience. And so, if you're searching for whatever it is you're searching, think about if you want some shoes. Would you rather have, a Nike product page that shows some pictures of the shoes, or do you want somebody who's like, walking around in the shoes, testing the shoes, trying shoes, other shoes on, talking about what it feels like to wear the shoes, and then you add on it's somebody that and then you're like, oh wow, right? That's a much different experience. And so why is that relevant to lawyers? Well, it's the same thing. People do, well, hiring lawyers is totally different than buying shoes. Well, sure, in some ways it is. But in some ways, it's even more important in the context of hiring a lawyer that you've got who you are, what you're all about, what your personality is going to be like, because it's a much more, human hiring decision than buying a pair of shoes.
And bluntly, a lot of people spend a lot more time thinking about the shoes they're going to buy than the lawyer they're going to hire, for right or wrong, right? When we come back, we're going to continue on the Nike brand conversation and talk about the self-defacing of the Morgan & Morgan billboards. Why or why not? Is this a good idea?
And we're back. Conrad, this is a story that I thought we just had to talk about. We've known about, John Morgan. We've talked about his firm, Bigger is Better, in the past, and some of the PR things that he's done. Well, recently, if folks are not familiar with the story, they apparently are perhaps self-defacing their own billboards. And so, they've got their traditional Morgan & Morgan billboard, and then it looks like someone like spray painted it to say they're all about the money, or, a variety of other things that you'd be like, are casting aspersions about the firm. We'll make sure to include some pictures, some shot. If you're on YouTube, you can really showing some of these examples. But if you're just listening to the podcast, head over to YouTube and you can see some examples, and we'll try to put some in the show notes. And so this came up on LinkedIn. Darrell Champion wrote about it. He's a lawyer in Atlanta, and people were hot about this, right? And I think I'm going to boil down, and I want to get your opinion, but I think there were kind of three major critiques. Critique number one is this is bad for the profession. It makes lawyers look bad to be doing this kind of stuff. It's tacky, no class. My view in this particular context, more specifically, is that does it bias jurors, right? So lawyers' number one obligation is to their clients. Do you go walk into court and they see you're a Morgan & Morgan attorney and they're like, you're doing these tasteless ads? Does that impact bias? I think that's a question. Number two, I guess you could say, does it, impact negative cast aspersions against the plaintiff's bar in general, right? These are like car accident, ambulance chasing lawyers. And so any juror that walks in comes in with a little more bias because of these billboards. And, that's a thing. That might be impacting. You got voir dire that's tried to weed some of that out. Not a perfect tool, but I think that's a valid critique. But a lot of it was just like, I think this is tacky. This is tacky. It makes the firm look bad. And I wouldn't hire a lawyer that does this to their branding and PR campaign, or I wouldn't refer to a lawyer that does this. Conrad, what do you think?
Well, the interesting piece about this is we have talked previously about the effectiveness of advertising that I would consider utterly tasteless. The Texas Lawhawk is one of my favorite examples of someone I would never hire. And that doesn't matter because he really leans deep into I am not a serious professional, but he does this very, very effectively to generate brand awareness. And for his market, which is not me, it's probably not Gyi. It might not be anyone listening to this podcast, but there is a market for whom tacky works. This has always been the case. This has always been the case. And, the Morgan & Morgan, Darrell writes, and it's interesting, when the first vandalized Morgan & Morgan billboard appeared, I received a few texts from people about it because they thought somebody actually vandalized it. Think about that sentence. People are so fascinated by this happening that they're texting other lawyers about this, right? From a pure attention grabbing perspective, it's hard to beat that. And brand awareness, right? I talk about brand affinity. I love the concept of brand affinity, but brand awareness is so difficult to generate. And in the billboard game, it is so crowded. I mean, I don't need to tell the audience this. How do you get your billboards to stand out? And the objective of these billboards, this is not a direct to consumer, it's not a direct response avenue. This is a brand awareness avenue. How do you get your billboards to stand out amongst hundreds, thousands of other billboards? Pull something like this. I think this is genius. I think this is absolutely genius. And I think, we rarely talk about lawyers being at the cutting edge of advertising and marketing, but boy, oh boy, can I see other brands following suit on stuff like this. I think it's genius. Is it tasteless and tacky? Yeah. Is it effective? Yeah. Right? Those two things are not mutually exclusive. We've had, and by the way, I think you have to acknowledge that this is going to turn some people off, right? I think, I think we did a segment, or at least I've written about this. Morgan & Morgan's, they had this tagline, and there was a big shakeup in their staff over this. They had the size matters tagline, right? I think that's more tasteless and more tacky than defacing your own billboards. And I certainly think that will have turned off some people. Having said that, from a positioning and a brand awareness perspective, pulling something like the basest penis size marketing, tasteless, tacky, and it's going to turn off some users, right? Some potential customers. But it works for them because it is memorable and it stands out.
Yeah, it's funny because, as you mentioned, you talk about it in the context of brand affinity. We talk about this all the time, right? So it's awesome to be known for something that there's overlap with your audience and what you're passionate about, right? So if you're passionate about Chicago food, you're going to get people that are passionate about Chicago food attracted to your audience. If you're you want to make it a little bit more substantive, you're a advocate for safety and an advocate for people that are injured, regardless of whether they needed to hire a lawyer if they're in a car accident. You're just a safety advocate and maybe a disability advocate for people that are dealing with those issues. And so, there's an overlap there, and that's what you're passionate about. It's funny when it's like something like this, where it's like, look, is there really an infinity audience for people that call it cheeky, cheeky advertising stuff? Maybe some, but to me, the other thing that we kind of talked about this in the LinkedIn comments, but question, putting aside the impact on the profession and the impact on juror bias, let's just talk about performance of the firm. I don't think anybody can argue that it doesn't get awareness, right? Here we are talking about it. Daryl's getting text. You can go search for this online and you'll see that they got news coverage. It actually got links and yada, yada, yada. So the PR and the SEO and all that kind of jazz. But does it actually, what's the impact on actually consumers who are considering hiring this firm? And, like you said, there are some people that are going to say, look, I wouldn't hire a lawyer that does that. Guess what? A lot of those people probably weren't going to hire that lawyer anyway for some of the other marketing activities that the firm did. And by the way, we're also taking this in a vacuum. Morgan & Morgan does a lot of philanthropic work and a lot of other PR stuff that is more, feel-good, community-based advertising. And so it's not, you can't just take this ad in a vacuum, right? Because the people that in Florida that are seeing this, they're also seeing a lot of the other stuff that the firm does. So some people are going to be like, look, I just wouldn't hire a firm that does this. Okay, that's true. Some lawyers, a lot of lawyers, in fact, as evidenced by the comments on LinkedIn, wouldn't refer to a firm that does this. I would never refer to a firm that does this. Well, Let me ask you a question. Were you referring to them before? Right? Yeah. I mean, how many are like,
this is a net zero, right?
I used to refer to them, but now seeing this ad campaign, I'm not. And some of those that even don't like it, they're probably still going to refer to Morgan & Morgan. So
well, and
there's
by
that.
the way, it's not just Morgan & Morgan pulling this stuff. Like this
Yeah, right.
happens regularly. We've covered this before. Do you remember Corey Fettman, divorce lawyer who did the Life is Short, Get a Divorce? And it was, I believe it was her in lingerie on the billboard, right?
Yeah.
Again.
No, you see this stuff all the time.
And Varner Fader, right?
Yeah, give that
Varner
one. That's a
Fader
good
just
one.
put something out. They are, I believe, out of Denver. Their personal injury billboards say fuck around and find out, right? Well, it doesn't say fuck around. It's F around and find out. But like they're pushing the boundaries. This is awareness and getting awareness with a banal billboard just doesn't work.
Yeah, so let's keep going down the list here. So then you've got just consumers who are like, I used to think I would hire Morgan & Morgan, but now that they've done this ad campaign, I'm not going to hire them anymore. There are probably some people that think that. I think that's a very small group too.
Yeah.
And then there's two other groups left. There's the group that's like, I see this, I don't really care, it's not really affecting me. I already knew about Morgan & Morgan, but I'm thinking about them again. And then there's the group that never, maybe this group's very small too, because Morgan & Morgan is so prolific in their branding that they've never heard of Morgan & Morgan.
These are West Coasters.
And this is the issue. This is the thing that people forget too. And I think we'll talk about more about this in our next segment. A lot of the people that consciously are like, this is gross, I would never hire a lawyer that does this, will still unconsciously call and hire Morgan & Morgan, because most of these decisions in this context are made unconsciously. Harvard did a study on this. You got the Burger King Whopper study. People are buying unconsciously. And so and that's why this survey data is so messed up, because they'll tell you, I would never hire a lawyer like this. And yet here you are hiring the lawyer.
All right.
Let's take a break. Hello. Are you watching this on YouTube right now? Congratulations. You get to see Conrad and I's smiling mugs. And Conrad has an actual mug. While you are here, do us a favor. Give us a thumbs up and subscribe. It really helps us out. It tells us that, hey, you actually like what you're hearing. You can give us a thumbs down too if you want to hear that too. And while you're at it, leave us a comment. You can post your deepest, darkest marketing question. You can try to heckle us. You can try to stump us. We'd love to answer it on the show. If you're a regular listener, you know we do this all the time. We want to hear from you. And thanks for listening.
All right, Gyi. Building on the Billboard conversation, I want to talk about brand versus performance advertising. And can you just quickly give an overview of what we mean by branded advertising versus performance advertising, and then we'll get into the meat of this.
I love this conversation. So I am guilty of being a performance biased marketer. I fell in love with search a long time ago. Search has intent. Search is performance, right? It's non-brand. I'm searching for a car accident lawyer, best car accident lawyer. It's Google Ads, direct response ads. It's very quantifiable. It's very efficient. That's what we mean when we most people think of performance, direct to consumer performance marketing and advertising. Brand is that fuzzy stuff, right? What is brand, right? In the context of legal marketing, I've written about this and talked about this before, but to me, it's just reputation, right? It's what you're known for. You can talk about brand in other contexts and logos and all this kind of stuff, but really what it boils down to is like, what do people think about when they think about you? And do they, most importantly to the context of this conversation, do they even think about you when they have the issue or problem or need that you solve? That's how I kind of think about brand. And they're constantly pitted against each other. Lawyers all the time are like, should I do brand? Should I do performance? And it's a false dichotomy. It's the same thing we talk about with like the offline online distinction or the social versus search distinction. They both work. And, you can get into, we talk about, I always talk about a legal trends report. If you go back, I think it's I might get the year wrong, 2018's legal trend report, but Clio did the survey, and there's a lot of these surveys support this too. Half the people are going to just be like, I'm going to a lawyer from a referral, and referral is largely brand, right? It's your reputation, it's word of mouth. It's like, are people thinking about you? And about half are going to do their own search, and that's more in the performance bucket. Conrad, what do you think about brand?
So when I think through the things that you can do from a brand perspective online, right? I think it's important to kind of get tactical in what are we talking about. There is the traditional display. I am going to put my Nike ads out there, and ideally I'm putting them in front of people who have some level of affinity for Nike. And there's all sorts of targeting that you can do with that traditional display. Now, and from there, like, you can also build out things like branded videos and stuff like that, have those show up on YouTube. But there's some level of targeting to this, and the objective here is just to get that impression in front of people over and over again.
Certainly geographic targeting.
Yeah, ideally geographic targeting, right? Oh boy, we could go into that segment. That's another segment. So
next time.
We'll come back to that next time. Yeah. We'll come back to that next time. So yeah, ideally you've got some geo-targeting in there, and you're putting your brand in front. Now, when you're doing that, and we can go back to the billboards on this, and the success of billboards. One of the things that we've talked about a little bit on billboards, and you and I are speaking out of church talking about billboards, but the effectiveness of billboards is often around simplicity of the message, right? So it is either a memorable phone number or a consistent website, and it uses consistent colors and logos and single image of a single person, because you see that over and over and over again, and that eventually seeps into your subconscious, which is what you're referring to with Morgan Morgan. This is also another reason not to change your logo every 5 years. So that's kind of your standard display. Now, another component of brand that is extremely effective is retargeting. And retargeting, which I'm assuming 95% of the people listening to this know what it is. 95% of you are not doing it also. But that is basically putting your branded display. It is an element of targeting where you're putting your branded ads in front of people who have been on your site. And that is such a no-brainer to me, because you already have people who have recently been on your site, and you're now just re-exposing to the brand. The key here is, with those retargeting campaigns, the number of impressions served are very low, because you just don't have that much website traffic. But the effectiveness of those impressions is very high, because that is someone who's already been on your website, right? And so this is like a drop-dead, no-brainer, easy to do channel. The one caveat on that is you have to have enough website traffic for the retargeting engines to actually have someone to retarget, right? So if you're running 500 sessions a month, there's probably not enough for you to actually get out there.
But you might have a bunch of emails from former clients that you can create a custom audience around.
Great. Let's get.
Lawyers are always talking about it. Hey, how do I stay in touch with former clients? We'll send them. We have talked email. Put them in a custom audience, and then let them see your shining face and your prolific reputation for delivering awesome client services and results for clients all around wherever they go.
So, at the risk of saying the phrase "size matters" twice in one podcast, building out the size of your CRM database, building out that list of emails that you can actually push your brand to regularly, very, very valuable marketing tactic. And the other branding thing that I really enjoy is all of the work. We talk about social a lot here, and all of the content that you're pushing out on social does a great job of reaching people who know you on social. You can push that brand out to what I call the second circle of people who know people, or people who are like those people that already know you, and doing that on social. And that, again, it is pushing your brand out there on the regular. What we have not said during any of this is that we are trying to find that person looking for a car accident lawyer right now, or looking for a divorce lawyer right now. This is about repeated exposure to a consistent brand image, which is logo, phone number, perhaps website, perhaps picture of a lawyer, over and over again. Drip that into the subconscious. It's not affinity. It's not that I like you. It is, I know who you are and you're memorable, right? And so these are kind of the key pieces of this. There's so much value in this brand, and it does not have to be, it does not always have to be ridiculously expensive.
And I think the other thing that if it's not clear, I mean, it's implied by a lot of this conversation, but just to really spell it out for folks, one of the biggest mistakes that I see is people try to use a direct response performance creative in a branding campaign. I'll give you an example. The billboard that has a tracking number on it. Are you really hoping? You're hoping one of two things if you're doing that. You're either hoping that someone gets in a car accident right in front of the billboard and looks up and says, oh, I need to call that number. Or that they're vigorously writing down the number to be saved in their phone for a later time when they need a car accident lawyer. And guess what?
And then they get into a car accident because they're doing that.
And then the best part is they're like, this billboard's not working because no one's calling the direct response phone number. And it's like, no, person, wrong. And we see the same thing in branded social ads, right? You see the direct response. And look, there are some direct response categories that I think it might make sense in. You know, I know that there's been some success with the mass torts folks on social and direct response paid social ads, because you're like, I'm trying to capture anybody in the country who's taken this particular drug, or if it's a pharmaceutical, mass tort. But for your single event car accident lawyer, like the free consultation, like you're sending out, you're going to run up impressions and clicks on free consultation following your car accident. I mean, you're really good luck,
Yeah.
And again, there's some you can have it both ways, right? You can do that, but if it's missing the branding stuff, if you're doing a brand campaign, doesn't have any of the branding stuff, like there's none of the stuff Conrad talked about, the consistency, maybe a tagline, maybe a vanity number, maybe a URL, maybe a testimonial or something like that. Whatever it's going to be, that's supposed to be the memorable part. You are just leaving dollars on the table. If you've got a picture of a car with a number, and you're like, I'm just doing direct response on an awareness campaign on Facebook, good luck.
Yeah. I want to come back to your tracking number point and the branding point on this. You and I grew up in a world where you could track direct response, and we still live in this world. You can track direct response really well with sophisticated tracking infrastructure.
And you should.
And 100% you should. And this is one of the dumbest dichotomies that digital marketing people make. They miss the fact that direct response can and should be tracked very, very well. Branded stuff, it is a munging of all of the stuff that you are doing. And
How'd you hear about us?
We have one of these conversations at least once a month where you have to recognize that you put all of that brand effort into one big pot. And ideally, in a perfect world, if you do have some form of consistent phone number, go call Paul Faust, right? And get a memorable number and use that across all of those different channels, all of your marketing, all of your branded marketing channels. And you know what you're going to do? You're going to add all of it up and divide. And it's still not going to be accurate. Divide by the number, add all the costs up, divide by the number of inbounds, and now you have a rough guesstimate on what your branding campaign might return, right? But there is a value in those memorable numbers that are consistent across all of your branding efforts. And that's how it works. Do not try and do the branded advertising with tracking numbers. It's just stupid.
Yeah. And, there's other ways you can track brand growth, right? You can look at Search Console data, branded queries in Search Console data,
100%.
Google Ads. You can see if you're bidding on, branded queries there. And the other thing, to Conrad's point, if you're kind of working through that quick math that he did, for all of your digital stuff that is direct response, you can measure that. And so you can look at those and say, look, we're going to take these off the board because we know that those came from these sources and, on these keywords and yada, yada, yada. And then, with what's left, call it whatever you want. You can call it brand, you can call it non-attributed, whatever you want to call it. But you'll see, and we've talked about this before, and Conrad's talked about in the context of dark social. This is why also it's still so important to ask, how did you hear about us? Yes, it's not going to be as sophisticated as, attribution modeling that's happening with all your fancy technology, but it does give you some direction on we hear this, I'm sure you get this too, Conrad. We'll ask, how did you hear about us? Well, we listened to Lunch Hour Legal Marketing, right? So there you go. Now we're not tracking that. We don't have a QR code or hey, type in Lunch Hour Legal Marketing into our form if you listen to Lunch Hour Legal Marketing. It just happens organically.
If you would like to call Gyi, type in lunchhourlegalmarketing.org. If you would like to call Conrad, dial lunchhourlegalmarketing.gov. Right? Don't do that.
Scan the QR code.
Yeah. Don't do that shit. I want to pick up one other really interesting point about brand and direct response overlapping. One of the things that happens these are studies outside of the legal industry, but the stronger your brand awareness is, the higher the click-through rate on your pay-per-click ads, right? So just that awareness, just the awareness is going to actually improve the click-through rate on your pay-per-click ads. What happens when you do that is Google, which calculates a quality score, which is based on your click-through rate, is like, wow, people really like this brand and or this ad, and they tend to click on it at a higher rate than other ads. Therefore, I'm going to increase your quality score, which actually has the impact of decreasing the amount you have to bid in order to be at that position. So it improves the economics of your pay-per-click advertising because of the change in the click-through rate. Now, it's a small change, but when you're spending $10,000, $20,000, $40,000 a month on this, these small changes all add up to make the economics of your pay-per-click campaign more effective. So don't miss that. There are overlaps and nuances with the ways your brand has an impact on your and this also happens organic, right? So you're getting higher click-through rates. It has an impact.
Conrad, you're giving away all of our secrets. You're like the magician telling how to do the tricks here.
Right.
You're not supposed to say that part, but yeah, that can have a
out of
huge
business.
impact. Conrad's underselling how much of an impact that can actually have on cost per clicks and yada, yada, yada. Unfortunately, with that amazing tip, we have to say farewell and adieu until next time. Thank you so much for stopping by for this Lunch Hour Legal Marketing episode. If this is your first time here, please do subscribe. Check us out on YouTube. And we'd love to hear from you. #LHLM. Give us your feedback. Ask questions. What would you like to hear about? Thanks so much. Until next time, Conrad and Gyi are out of here.
Money makes a it makes a world go round. Money makes a world go round. Yeah, money make a world go round. Money makes a world go round. Yeah, money make a world go round.